911 operators of Reddit. What's the strangest, serious emergency you've heard? Not me, but my cousin. She had this lady who would call regularly and often make up stories, most likely due to loneliness, but they still had to send someone out every time. So one day when they got a call from her, they figured it would be another one of those calls. 911, what's your emergency? There's a lion in my living room. There's a lion in your living room? What's it doing? She pauses to ask it what it was doing. I don't know, just standing there. Can you send someone over? Turned out there was actually a lion cub in her living room that had escaped from a circus or something. This is a classic boy who cried wolf scenario, but hey, it's good they send someone out every time. Of all the ones to be real, I bet they never expected the lion in the living room, huh? Story 2. The very first emergency call I took by myself during training, trainer was hooked into my phone and could jump in whenever, I answered a 911 call while my trainer was trying to grab a cup of coffee from the machine. And as soon as the phone connected, there was what sounded like an explosion and people screaming all over the place. Scared the bejeebus out of my trainer, who sprinted back to the desk thinking I just picked up on some huge disaster or accident. They take over the call and start asking questions. Turns out what we heard was just rushing water from a hot water heater that ruptured. It was spewing water all over these two girls' apartment and they were freaking out, not knowing what to do about it. Bonus story. Had a similar call a few years later. Picked up to a bunch of people being loud, sounding panicked. Talking about someone being locked in a car. Thought it was a child locked in a car, a very high priority call for my agency due to being in Florida and a few recent deaths. So I put the call in as urgent, while trying to get anyone on the phone to actually talk to me. But then I hear a door open and someone in the background screams, "It's out! The chicken is free!" And the phone disconnects. Florida. Story 3. Obligatory not 911 operator, but I'm the son of the caller. My dad called 911 late one night to report hitting a 6-foot-tall chicken while driving and running off into the ditch. He had just crashed his car and his voice was a bit shaky on the phone, so the operator asked him to repeat himself a couple of times, and then promised to send someone to help. The first cop on scene got out of his car with a breathalyzer in hand. By the time he got to the back of my dad's car, he was laughing hysterically over his radio, telling people it wasn't a DUI call. My dad actually did hit a 6-foot-tall chicken. And that's the story about the night my dad and all the local cops learned about emu farming. Story 4. 911, what's your emergency? There's a pig in the road. A big one. Sir, where are you? At the stoplight. It's the biggest damn pig I've ever seen. Get someone here now. One stoplight town. The bar is near the intersection. How big is the pig? About the size of a Volkswagen. How much have you had to drink? I'm not frickin' drunk. It's a giant pig the size of a small car. What is wrong with you people? Officers show up to find a full-grown hippo that had escaped the local wild animal park. Big frickin' pig. This was at 2:30 a.m. when the bars close. I mean, I guess hippos kind of look like a really big pig. If you haven't seen one before, or know what a hippopotamus is, I guess. I don't get the whole thing they're drunk when they report something like this, though, because drinking doesn't make you hallucinate, typically. So if they're actually seeing what they're seeing, not an alcohol thing. Now something else, maybe. Story 5. Not me, but my dad works in an emergency room. And one time we had to treat someone who had been attacked by an owl. The owl was unconscious on the side of the road and she thought it was dead. Because she didn't want children on the school bus to see the dead owl, she decided the best course of action would be to put the owl in the back of her car. Unfortunately, the owl wasn't dead. It woke up and attacked her. Story 6. We got a call from a woman having severe abdominal pains. Simple enough. We asked the normal questions. Are you feeling faint? Are you vomiting blood? Stuff like that. Then we asked if it was traumatic or not. She says, well, and eventually tells us she had a tampon stuck inside of her for more than 20 days. And she thinks that might be why she's hurting. Bonus story. I heard someone else in a different thread that had a funny story. This guy and his wife were playing around with various vegetables, and the guy gets a carrot lodged up his, So they tried to remove it so they wouldn't have to call 911. She used a pair of burger tongs and grabbed onto something and pulled, but she was actually pulling at his intestines. Fun. If you get something stuck, just call 911. I've heard it all before. I really don't care you have a vegetable garden in your rectum. I just want to get you help. Hey, the classic PSA of don't let your shame get in the way. If you need help, you need help. Simple as that. They really have heard it all before. Story 7. I've got one for you. The obligatory not 911, but it'll tie together. So I worked for an alarm monitoring company. I get an inbound call in the middle of the night from somewhere in Philadelphia. Guy on the line sounds real out of it, drunk, maybe. My first thought was it was someone calling in to cancel a false alarm. Messed up voice was them waking from sleep, not uncommon. some alarms, start going off in my head. The guy isn't making a whole lot of sense, and it's really hard to get basic information out of him. Eventually, I pieced together that he's a gas station worker and he's been shot. For some reason, he dialed the alarm company instead of 911. We weren't even his alarm company. There was probably an old sticker in the shop somewhere, so I've got no info on this guy. Mind you, we don't have any magical reverse phone lookup system, and our systems are locked down such that we can't access a web browser. Genius, I know. I pulled out my phone, also not allowed. Managed to look up a gas station with the inbound number in Philly, called 911 and got police and medical out there. No idea how it ultimately shook out. Stayed on the line keeping the guy conscious and talking until they got there and then disconnected. OP got drafted as a 911 operator that day. That was not the job they signed up for, but it's the job they had to do. Anyway, from the sounds of it, the guy got medical attention on time, so nice. On the other hand, you didn't know 911? I mean, I haven't been shot before. Maybe you get incredibly disoriented. Fair enough. Story 8. I'm a telephone triage nurse, so not 911, but a 24-hour hotline for people to call when they're having a medical emergency but aren't sure if they need to go to the ER or not. I have a few favorite stories, but I'll share this one. A quite pregnant, don't remember exactly how far along, but definitely past 30 weeks, woman calls to say that her doctor told her to refrain from banging for the rest of the pregnancy and she didn't understand why. I looked at her file and saw she was having preterm contractions, so I explained that any intimate activity can cause contractions, so it was safer to abstain so the baby could stay inside as long as possible. She tearfully exclaims, "But how will I feed the baby?" I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you repeat that? How will I feed the baby if I can't bang? The patient was convinced that her baby was living off of her boyfriend's seed, and that it would starve if they stopped. I explained about the umbilical cord, etc., but she refused to believe me until I asked her about single moms, lesbian moms, etc., and asked how she thought their babies fed and grew. After a moment of silence, she thanked me, started to hang up the phone, but not before I heard her screaming her boyfriend's name. That man had a good thing going for a while there. I honestly wasn't sure if I felt more sorry for him or a baby growing up in that household. Story 9. Heard this one the other day. Not from the perspective of an operator, but close. EMS responds to a call where a man reported having multiple potatoes stuck up his butt. Not red potatoes, those big brown suckers. The kicker? I was washing my potatoes in the shower when I slipped and fell and all the potatoes went up there. I'm sorry. What? Look, man, if it makes you feel better, sure. But every single person there knows what happened. Hate to break it to ya. Story 10. We had a lady who would call all the time about people in her yard or on her house, usually doing nasty things. Always a false alarm. This lady had been calling since way before I got my job, and even now after I switched agencies, she's probably still calling. She's mental, but not a danger to herself or others, so no real need to commit her involuntarily. Well, one day we get a call from her about a man at her house causing the troubles for her. My supervisor who had answered the call finally got fed up and asked to speak to the man. To everyone's surprise, the woman handed the phone over to the man, and there was someone there. It was her brother. He was there trying to get her committed. We ended up, I believe, asking him to leave the property because he couldn't have her committed against her will at that time. Just goes to show you that crazy doesn't always mean wrong. Story 11. 1. Ultra calm caller. Girlfriend is having a fit. Does she have any weapons? Just the eggs she's thrown at me. What's she wearing? Underwear. 2. Took a call for a hostage situation in a cab once. The driver was talking to me but trying not to make it obvious. Passenger implied a weapon and wanted him to drive to the middle of nowhere so that he could assault him and the lady in the front seat. The driver ended up crashing into another car to cause a distraction. 3. A screaming lady caller. He's throwing the car thing at me! It was a hubcap. 4. He flushed my weed, so I poured his beer out and we're about to throw down. 5. Guy found his pet cat's head sitting upright on the table on his front porch. No body. Called back later, someone had placed the body in his car. Story 12. Nothing really jumps out at me as strangest. I can think of worst, scariest, dumbest, most infuriating, etc. Some good ones are people saying they locked themselves inside their car, getting ripped off by an escort, someone stealing their things, and by things they meant a safe full of weed, a mugger going around and hitting people in the neck with a taser, yelling, "Surprise, motherfricker," in a deep voice and then taking their phones and wallets. Just so many damn 911 calls with people essentially calling and getting themselves arrested because they were in the wrong, not the person they called on. A guy went jogging along a beach, came back to find his car gone. While driving him home after taking a report, we drove by it. He forgot where he parked. Tried to let a guy off who was obviously up to some shady stuff, tell him and his girlfriend to just go rent a room and rethink their lives. They stole the cops' cell phone. He made a call for them because their phone was dead. Ended up having a crap ton of hard drugs in his car when he caught up to him later. Guy got into a fight with a bunch of ducks, started losing, tried jumping a fence, slipped and tore his nutsack open on the fence. And thinking about it, I do have one. So her boyfriend is bleeding in the shower. I tried to get her to say where and how. She beats around the bush and doesn't come right out. We got the paramedic to tell us afterward. She's a nurse and they were fooling around. She tried to catheterize him while he was hard. Ended up puncturing something and they couldn't get the bleeding to stop. Now look, I get it. Everyone has their things. Catheterizing though, oh boy. That's a choice, sir. Now, I'm not saying that you deserve the trauma or whatever that was inflicted on you that day, but it's just an interesting choice is all. Story 13. The emergency itself wasn't particularly strange, bleeding during pregnancy, nor was the call mine, but in training I listened to a call that contained the following exchange. So she's bleeding now? Yep. Where is she bleeding from? From her bottom part. Which bottom part, sir? I need you to be more specific. Her rectum front part. Wait, what? Sir, is she bleeding from her rectum or from the front? God damn it, she's bleeding from her kitty hole. Look, when you're on the phone with a 911 operator of all people, you don't have to be PG, sir. I promise you. Just say the words. Story 14. A friend of the family was, potentially still is, a paramedic with a helicopter service here. I'm not sure if this was when he was ground-based or in the helicopter, but he enjoyed this story. He was called out to a head trauma incident and arrived to find a man sitting in his living room acting very normal for a call like that. So he asked what was wrong, and the man said, "Well, I've got this here," and turned to show a screwdriver buried to the hilt in his head. So the paramedic obviously said something along the lines of how that isn't good. And the man said, "No, it's all right," and began turning the screwdriver. They had to tell him to stop. Story 15. Was a 911 operator for 5 years. Had a woman call, screaming, "He's stabbing me! He's stabbing me!" She's getting away from her husband, who's going at her over and over with an ice pick. It becomes evident to me that she's moving around the house in an attempt to get away. I'm telling her, "Can you barricade yourself? Can you get away from him? Can you get out of the house?" She told me that she's trying and interjects that her husband is blind? Now, I'm really confused. She's not giving me much information, typical with panicky victims in the heat of a crime, and I'm trying to figure out how she can't get away from a blind person. She gets quiet and I can hear him saying all kinds of nasty things about her. Cops get there, secure the scene, and they fly her to a trauma center. She lived, but still, we were all standing around after, so confused that this woman couldn't escape a blind man from stabbing her. Story 16. One day I had walked in after getting a Subway sandwich. My shift started at 1 p.m. Coworkers had received both 911 and normal calls from a wife and mother about their husband/son. He was walking around talking about taking all the children to heaven and circling the house for hours. There was a newborn, a toddler, and I think a 5-year-old. It was on a weekend, and our chief advised that as long as he isn't acting dangerous or violent, just odd, they can wait for a mental health warrant from the Justice of the Peace on Monday. It's East Texas, and it's a good 20 to 30 minute drive going the speed limit to get anywhere, and sometimes over an hour from one end to the other, if you know where you're going. Well, this continues up until about 11 p.m. The mother and wife are getting more and more antsy that he's been walking in circles all day and muttering the same thing for hours. Then I get a call that begins with a loud bang, screaming and crying from the wife and her newborn. The husband had ended the lives of his 2 sons and his mother with a shotgun, and was coming for her. She cried, asking why we didn't help them and to please save her and her babies. And then, after about 10 seconds, another bang. The wife's life was ended nearly instantly, and the baby had 1 to 2 pellets into its head. It was making gurgling sounds before dying. After that, maybe a minute later, I heard another bang. The guy had put a slug into a shotgun and blasted the top portion of his face off, laid on the ground and drowned in his blood. And that's it. I was kind of hoping this thread would be a little more upbeat compared to what we usually cover on this channel, because I know I read the comments, trust me. A lot of people are like, "Man, this is depressing. Can we get something a little lighter?" But, not this story at least. I did not think that's where this one was going. Anyway, on to the next. Story 17. Posted this before, but the first call I took was from a blind elderly male. He called because he had found his son on the floor of a bedroom. He wasn't responding, so I had him tilt his head back and listen for a breath. Nothing. He said he was warm and he had talked with him less than 20 minutes prior, so I guided him through CPR. Compressions only because of the circumstances. He lived in a rural part of our country and we were low on rigs, so we did this for about 12 minutes before help arrived on scene. EMS goes inside and immediately asks for PD. This isn't unusual. Sometimes loved ones can't or don't want to believe that it's too late, so we go through the motions until a trained eye is there. PD gets there and asks for a detective. This is also not unusual for younger deaths. 2 hours later and still there, it piques my curiosity. I called the first officer that arrived and found out the poor man had been doing CPR on his now mostly headless son. He had been taking a nap and his son took his own life with a shotgun. It woke him up, but not enough to register that it was a gunshot, I guess. When I had asked him to tilt his head back, he did so by using his chin, which was still there. I think it worked out for the best because he had support there when he learned the truth, and it didn't make my job any tougher, but it definitely made for an unusual start to my dispatch career. Story 18. I was a 0 operator, not 911, but many small towns didn't have 911, so I got a few emergency calls as well. I got a call from a 13-year-old girl once who had just gotten home from school. She couldn't find her father, but there was an ominous note there that she had read to me. I had police on the way and told her to wait outside for them. Rather, I heard her walking around the house, going from room to room, opening doors looking for him. After about a minute, she let out a blood-curdling scream, yelling, "He's here." He was hanging dead in the garage. It was a terrible call. I got a 15-minute break and had to get right back on board taking calls again. It's been almost 20 years and I can still hear her voice. Story 19. For a year in college, I was a 711 operator. For those not in the US, this is a national relay service provided for deaf or hard of hearing people who need to use the phone. Occasionally, in real 911 emergencies, people would misdial 711 instead. Happens a lot and that's fine. We just keep you on the line and transfer you to 911 instead. But by law, we're required to stay on the line until the call is completed in case our services are legitimately needed. So most of the time we mute ourselves and stay out of the way. But one time I legit had a deaf person using a TTY device calling to report a break-in at her house. It is very important to understand what a TTY device is to understand the context of the story. A TTY is a teletypewriter. The deaf person places the phone on the TTY, and they type on it. That generates chiming tones. These tones get translated into letters and formulate text which I can read on my system. I then type back using these same tones. Think of it as text messaging using chimes. It's very important to note these chimes are not quiet. Anyway, I had to interrupt the call to advise the 911 operator that her TTY would be making very loud sounds, indicating her position in the house and alert her presence to the intruder, and that she was likely not aware she was being so loud. We had to encourage her to be very brief with her words, to limit the sound she made, to give only her address, and then hide immediately without using the phone any longer because it would give her away. After typing only her address, she stopped typing back. So I switched my system over from TTY incoming translation to normal audio, so the 911 operator and I could both hear any ambient sounds on the line. After 15 minutes of harrowing, dead silence, we finally heard police knocking very loudly on the door, not that the lady could hear. They eventually got into the house either through an unlocked door or maybe they broke it down, no idea. But after a while an officer picked up the phone to let us know the situation was under control and we could hang up now. No idea what resolution happened, but I assume she was fine. Story 20. Was about to leave after a really calm night shift. Take one last call. This guy just asks for an ambulance for his mother, like so many early in the morning. No panic or anything in his voice. So as always, I ask him what's happening before I transfer him to paramedics. He says, "Well, I think I just ended her life, but I'm not sure if she's dead yet." And he puts the phone on the side. 30 seconds pass with no sound. He picks back up and tells me, "Well, I just made sure and stabbed her a few more times and put the knife in the sink. I'll be waiting outside. Bye." 9 years later, and I can still hear it clear in my mind. Turns out he was mentally ill and his mother kept him at home. Story 21. This one requires a little backstory before the actual call. We had a female that called quite often, even moved from our jurisdiction to another location. But because we were better at customer service, she wouldn't call them on 911. She would instead call our 7-digit non-emergency line to get to us. She called regularly, often for ridiculousness like the time she told me her gay neighbors, who were abominations, were also watching her while she showered. Another instance, she called to let us know elves were at her house and had stolen both her hair and her uterus. Needless to say, not all there. Every time we ask her if she wants someone out there, she always says no. Fast forward a while and she's in this other jurisdiction and we can't respond. She tells us a man was smoking cigarettes under her mattress. We go through the usual routines for her and surprisingly she says she wants someone over. We call the local PD and tell them the nature of her call and politely suggest, due to her out-of-the-ordinary request to see someone, that they send someone out. Police arrived to find a homeless man smoking cigarettes under her bed. He'd pried open a window and snuck in to get out of the weather. And here are a few crazy/funny/weird calls that are just bizarre. Lady calls to complain that the power entering her house is now coming from a different direction due to construction down the road from her to the north and that it's causing power fluctuations. Being rational, I let it go and go to tell her that it's a power company problem, not 911. She then says it's our problem because every time the power fluctuated, people entered her house. My personal understanding was that it must be interfering with her alarm, so I asked her how they were gaining entry, to which she responded, "Through my chest." My brain tried to rationalize it in any way I could, but nope, nothing was coming to me, short of someone tunneling into her home, which was absurd. So my next question was, of course, what chest? "Through my chest, from right between my breasts." She received a prompt response. Next up was the woman that gave me a general area to check because zombies were surrounding her house, and she wanted us to get out there and do what we do. Then there was Jesus, the Morning Star, the Trinity, who needed help because she had lost her throne and wanted help finding it. Story 22. Best memorable call I had was when I was still in training. It was a few days into starting to take 911 calls on my own with my trainer just listening in, and I get a very calm lady asking for paramedics. I ask for her address and why. She says her son cut off his dong. I parroted back what I heard, while mentally I was going, "Excuse me, what?" Lady confirms that her son cut off his dong with a knife and there is blood everywhere. Now the whole room is bustling getting the resources I need for this guy with a knife who is probably bleeding out. I ask where her son is in the house, where the knife is, etc. When the lady can't really answer my questions, that's when I know something is up. She has no idea where he is and she never saw him cut off anything, so I ask her how she knew her son did this. She replies, "I have visions and revelations. I can see the knife." Oh boy. It becomes a back and forth figuring out who her son is and if anyone's even hurt. Lady even gave a neighbor's address instead of her own. Eventually, we find her son's phone number through associations. The guy is actually just 2 years younger than her and a roommate. So my supervisor hops on the phone and calls the guy and cuts to the chase. "Hey, is this so-and-so? Did you cut off your dong?" Spoiler, his dong was still attached. Otherwise, here are a few other calls I remember. 1. A drug addict couple birthing their baby in a bathtub. CPS got involved. Real quick on that. 2. Double homicide. Talk to the teenager that managed to run out of the house after an adult roommate shot and murdered mom and the teen's boyfriend. Teen thankfully wasn't hurt and ran to a neighbor's house. She vividly remembered every detail and was very calm until officers were with her. She was a stellar RP and was very mature. I'm super proud of her for keeping herself collected after seeing everything happen. I hope her life has turned for the better since then. 3. Someone taking their own lives on the phone. My first one. Older guy called in from his house phone and very calmly started telling me his address, name, and date of birth. He proceeded to ask to tell his family he couldn't take it anymore and asked us to turn off his French porch light when we arrived. Also gave us a next of kin info. I tried talking to him, but he didn't even acknowledge me. He made up his mind. I heard a metallic bang immediately after he gave me the last bit of instructions. First, I thought I heard a metal chair or step stool fall onto tile floor. I kept an open line until officers were with him, confirming a self-inflicted gunshot wound through the left temple. Guy had a ton of health problems and just couldn't take it anymore. I can vividly remember the raspy and scratchy sounds I heard during the open line, which I believe were gasps, death rattles, and body twitches. He shot himself outside, so his family didn't have to deal with cleanup. And of course, we had no other callers reporting shots fired in the area. Story 23. I'm not the source. This happened to my brother-in-law. He was a paramedic and his ambulance was responding to a call in the poor part of the city. A young girl was bleeding. They got there and the girl said she was bleeding from her private area. The mother was there but clueless. They looked around and counted the number of siblings. I don't remember the exact number, but it was over a dozen. The mother had never had a period in her life. She really did not know what it was and could not explain it to her daughter. That's my favorite true story of how messed up the welfare system can be. Story 24. My wife has worked with the Poison Information Center for years, and she has stories, such as this one. Guy called, clearly in pain, and throughout the call, my wife could hear the voice of a woman laughing uncontrollably. Turns out the guy wanted a bit of quality intimacy with his girlfriend who just wasn't in the mood that night. He can't sleep on account of this major case of blue balls, so he gets up still in the dark, grabs the lotion, heads to the toilet to deal with it himself. That's when the burning started. Turns out it wasn't lotion after all, but a tube of neat. So the poor blue-balled mother fricker is recounting this while in the throes of horrible dong hurt, while his girlfriend is laughing hysterically, and the laughter gets contagious. As first my wife, then her coworkers all overhear what's happening and start laughing uncontrollably themselves. Told him to put it in a glass of cold ice water with tears in their eyes. On the other hand, there was a time a guy called after his pet tarantula fanged him in the tongue after he put it in his mouth. The first one, that's unfortunate, man. That sucks. Truly hilarious though, so sorry. The second one, what are you doing? Don't do what? Why would you put a tarantula in your mouth? Are you trying to show off? Do you think it knows not to bite you or whatever it would be called? Because I guarantee you, it doesn't. It does not know who you are. Story 25. So strange, serious, and actual emergency don't often overlap, but I have a few that work. 1. Caller says her crazy roommate is losing her crap, has a knife, and is screaming and trying to break stuff in the house. Caller is locked in the bedroom with a surprisingly calm attitude, noting that the roommate is nuts and this isn't that unusual. Responders are pretty far out, so I stay on the phone. Suddenly I hear loud banging, some sort of verbal altercation and tussling. I try to get my caller's attention again, while noting what I can overhear in the call notes. Caller gets back on the line and says the roommate had cut open her own hands and arms, busted in my caller's bedroom door, and smeared blood all over the caller. Then the roommate left the room to also call 911 so she could claim my caller had intentionally attacked her. 2. I was still training on phones. Call was already in for a check on welfare of an older woman who lived with her adult sons. The original caller said she hadn't heard from the mother and the sons were known to be aggressive and even violent. I answer a call from the landline phone at the target address and it's the mother, wondering where officers are because her sons are physically fighting. I remember being confused that she knew they were coming and wasn't the original caller. She wasn't very forthcoming with information, gave very short answers to direct questions. When she asked if she could get off the phone, I asked her to just set the phone down with the line open and she obliged. After a bit, I hear the mother and a male voice arguing in the background and mention of blood. More arguing, and then a male voice picks up the phone and says, "I just ended my brother's life in self-defense." He was surprisingly compliant and calmly told me what happened, with what weapon, where the weapon was now, his name, date of birth, everything. Still somewhat surprised I wasn't called into court for that one. 3. It's right shift change and the incoming rotation is notorious for callouts and trudging in at the top of the hour. I'm standing up just waiting for enough people to log in so I can leave. 911 is ringing. They have a few showing available but not actually answering, so I sigh and pick it up. The male caller says his roof has collapsed, and he has acid burns and that it is all over the floor. My agency uses specific questioning protocols for EMS and fire calls, so I launch into the program. We are not allowed to deviate from questioning until we get all the way through, with a few very specific exceptions. The caller is agitated and uncooperative, keeps asking what's taking them so long, as many do. There's often an apparent misconception that no one starts moving until all of our questions are answered, which is not the case. His responses to the questions elicit a full hazmat response from fire, and eventually prompts me to also send the call to EMS and law enforcement. I had already sent the call to LEO early on because of the caller's evasiveness and just a general vibe. Protocol instructions have me tell the caller to leave his house, but he is refusing. He keeps saying the responders have to come to him. Meanwhile, all 3 agencies, law, fire, EMS, are all in the area, but they parked down the road because the guy says the place is structurally unsound and there are dangerous chemicals everywhere. They aren't sending their people into that environment to create more victims if they can help it. The sergeant has me connect the caller to his cell phone and try to convince the guy to come out, but the caller is still belligerent, insisting they come to him. Finally, an officer basically says screw it and approaches the guy's house. I'm finally off the phone 20 minutes after I should have been done and take my tired butt home. When I look at the call the next day, the short of it is the dude was tripping balls. The caller was obviously agitated and pacing in front of the home when the officer tried to walk up. When he saw the officer, the caller immediately approached him, trying to remove his clothing to show the officer his non-existent acid burns. The house was intact and had no structural damage. And some more lighthearted ones. 4. Not my story, but a coworker. She had a male caller saying he was having thoughts of ending his own life and wanted to jump into traffic. While coworkers trying to get more information from him as responders are on the way, he gets frustrated with her, stating she's distracting him and keeps making him miss the passing cars. 5. We had almost daily occurrences of callers reporting a man standing naked on the side of the road, mooning passing cars around 5 a.m. near the county line. It was so far away from our deputies' normal downtime spots and consistently around shift change, so they were consistently unable to locate the man by the time someone got there. Dispatch named him the Brown-Eyed Bandit. 6. Female caller very concerned about something suspicious, mentioning a body in a large trunk or suitcase and an abandoned house, but was unable to clarify details and kept changing the story when I asked questions in an attempt to get a better idea of what the hell she's talking about. She was getting increasingly agitated as I tried to refocus her attention on statements she already made and asked clarifying questions. Finally, she gets so fed up with me asking questions that she says, "Can I talk to someone else other than you?" asking for Detective Stabler. I'm fairly new at the time and we work in a facility separate from the agencies we work with, so I don't know most of the officers by name. I give it serious thought for a second, thinking it may be someone on a different rotation, and then it hits me. Are you talking about the detective from Law and Order? Internally, I'm thinking, oh, this woman is crazy. And finally, 7. I don't remember the context, but I was asking for descriptive information on a caller's girlfriend of about a month. Me. What's her date of birth? Caller. I don't know, but she's a Scorpio. Well, Scorpio guy, you tried your best. I bet if they were together for any amount of time, he knew to memorize her birthday, because that would be humiliating to not know it on the phone with 911. Anyway, shout out to OP for 7 stories. After they were saying at the start, it's like, oh, strange, serious, and emergency don't often overlap. Yeah, okay. You just gave us more than anyone else in this thread so far. Also, can I just point out, OP wrote more lighthearted ones now, and then the first one is about a dude who wants to end his own life by jumping into traffic. Are you kidding me, OP? Do you know what lighthearted means? I could not believe my eyes when I read that. Story 26. Not an operator, though I want to be now. This is a 911 call on me made by my boyfriend in our small hometown. I have a rare disease called fibrous dysplasia / McCune-Albright syndrome. FD is where some places on one or more of your bones is replaced with fibrous tissue. This makes them bend, break, and deform easily. I have it in multiple vital bones of my body. Well, this leads to the one fateful night, actually exactly a year ago tonight, where my boyfriend has to call 911. He says, "We need an ambulance." She asks, "What for?" "My girlfriend has FD and her legs broke." "Was there an accident? Did she fall?" "No, she was walking." And then the dispatcher, unbelieving despite my continuous screaming in the background, "What makes you think they're broken? What happened?" "Just, her legs are weak and they broke. Send an ambulance." "Okay, sir, I'm sending help, but did she hit something? Did she fall on something wrong? How do we know they're broken?" He gets right up by me while I'm screaming and yells, "Her legs are broken!" and hangs up. The ambulance that showed up wasn't even fully prepared. I guess they really did have a hard time believing that someone's legs could just break on them while walking. They had to tear up a box we had laying nearby to stabilize it as much as possible, and they had to lift me to the stretcher thing in a sheet with the help of the firemen. That was absolutely excruciating, with a broken left tibia, broken left fibula, and a broken and completely displaced right femur. The worst. No meds until they got me to the plane to fly me to the hospital in the nearest city. Lesson to operators, sometimes people aren't just crazy. Sometimes bones really do just break. Story 27. Got a call from some girl saying, "Someone stole my car." I ask if she saw what direction they went. She says they're heading down the street and starts telling me the stores they're passing. I ask if she's following them. She says that she is in the car. I freak the hell out. She then says to whoever's driving, "Babe, slow down, this is crazy." Turns out she and her boyfriend were arguing. He started driving crazy since he was mad, and she decided to call it in as a stolen vehicle. Another story. We get a call that there's 2 loose dogs running around a major street. About 30 seconds later, an officer comes over the radio to tell me that they just hit 2 dogs on the street. Same dogs. 911 operators have a million crazy stories. I only did it for 4 months. Story 28. Not a 911 operator, but was in the vicinity. My best friend, we will call D, and I walked into his parents' house, expecting to find his girlfriend, we'll call her K, on the couch or bed. We were all planning on smoking a joint, chilling, and I was going to crash on the couch. On that exact same couch was K, skin mostly pale, lips blue, and a foam-like substance, a half-empty syringe beside her, and a dinner plate with a then unknown powder on the coffee table in front of her. D freaks out, smacking her face, lying her on her side, and desperately trying to get her to wake up. I don't care if they arrested all of us at this point and call 911. As I'm talking to the 911 operator, D cries, "She's got a pulse, man, I think," and began hugging her, sobbing harder than ever before. His parents ended up coming downstairs. His mom freaked out and was crying, and his dad saw the plate and began screaming about drugs being in the house. It got bad. I walked outside to finish the call before I broke down. It was soul-crushing to watch. Turns out Kay was still alive. Pulse was 35, very close to total cardiac arrest. The powder was fentanyl. No one was arrested. There's a law in my state that if EMTs are called and not police, the suspect cannot legally be charged with any drugs found at the location. They kept her for 2 days, giving her Narcan all throughout the first night. She went to rehab, and now she's with another classmate, happily married and with 2 children. D? Well, not so well, but that's for another time. Hey, I am genuinely proud of Kay for kicking an addiction, though. That's hard stuff. Both the drugs and the rehab. But if there's any way to get the motivation to pull yourself out of addiction, near death is probably it, huh? I hope D finds his way there eventually too. Story 29. During H overdoses, people seem to have the idea that they can shock the person back to life by throwing cold water on them, slapping them, sticking their genitalia in ice, and or sticking ice up their butts. I've had people stop doing CPR and just start slapping the patient, or not starting CPR so they can go get ice. It used to be strange, but not anymore, unfortunately. Story 30. 1. Jogger found a drunk male passed out in the bushes with his pants around his ankles. He was apparently robbed of his wallet, but the thief was considerate enough to leave a single debit card wedged between and sticking out of the victim's buttocks. We called the poor bastard Swipe ATM for weeks. 2. Couple banging in a hotel room. Woman falls off the bed and lands on a champagne flute, breaking it at the stem, puncturing through the side of her groin and hitting a femoral artery. She ended up bleeding out. Story 31. It wasn't my call, but one we had to listen to in training to prepare us for what we were getting into. Guy calls 911 to say there's a body in his house. They go through their routine, eventually getting the name of the deceased. That's where things get odd. When you call 911, a caller ID displays your information so we can confirm it. When the man gave her the name of the deceased, it was the same as the caller ID. She tells him she needs the deceased man's name, not his, as they'd already confirmed it. In a completely normal tone, he replies, "Oh no, I'm just telling you where to find my body and letting you know it wasn't a murder." The dispatcher spent the next few minutes trying to talk him out of it, doing her best to either convince him not to do it or at least try to stall him until the team gets there. The entire time, the man remains calm and almost cheery, like he was shrugging it off. "No, I made up my mind. I'll just be in the bedroom." The cops didn't get there in time. Dispatcher heard him say, "Thanks, bye," before a shotgun blast and agonal breathing. Cops arrived a few minutes later. I think it was just weird how calm he was about it. I've heard of people who wanted to end their own lives having that sort of more upbeat disposition when they finally make a plan to go through with it, but actually hearing it struck me as weird. Story 32. This is a true story from when I was a journalist. Man called 911 and reports that he'd been shot in the head. "Who shot you?" "Dunno." "Is he still in the house?" "Wasn't ever in the house." Dispatches cops and medical and gets more questions to ask about health, loss of consciousness, etc. Figured the guy was mistaken. Nope. Hole in the window, blood all over a nasty wound to the center of the man's forehead. Went to the hospital where he was stitched up. Bullet never penetrated the skull. Minor concussion, vertebra damage. Police found pieces of bullets in the wall behind where he reported standing and it matched to the hole in the window. Never found the shooter. Determined it was a .38 from long range and hit him at such an angle that it was deflected. Cops called him Hammerhead. Story 33. Not necessarily a 911 story, but my mom has been a nurse for 25 plus years and always comes home with eerie stories. She said that she sees things in nightmares still. Years ago, a baby was brought into the ER by a neighbor who heard the baby crying bloody murder next door. Rats had chewed off his ear while he was fully awake and the mother came to the ER and child services ended up letting her take him home. My mother says she always thinks about that baby and where he is now. Story 34. I wasn't the dispatcher, but I was called for mutual aid to a call one time. My buddy was the dispatcher that night for the county sheriff, and I was volunteering at a rural fire department. Anyway, around 11 p.m. we get paged out for a mutual aid. A search operation for a missing hunter at a local hunting camp. It's a small department, so it's just me and a kinda new guy. We get there and the sheriff and primary responding department tells us it's just some hunter who got separated from his party, which is fairly normal. Happens a couple times a year. But they have the rest of his party sitting in the squad car. I'm talking to the sheriff trying to get a grasp of where they haven't checked yet, and my probie goes to walk around. He came back and said the guys in the back of the squad car were just sitting there, staring straight ahead and not blinking. I'm confused at this point, because it's a hunting party, and they generally call in a missing person early afternoon, not at 11 p.m. So I call my buddy at dispatch to try to figure out what's going on. The sheriff wasn't being helpful. He tells me he got some weird call with a man that sounded like he was terrified, but would only whisper about how they're moving. My buddy finally gets the man on the phone to say where they are, and then the guy whispers, "I think they got him," and hangs up. I haven't heard much more on the story, but I know the call came from one of the guys in the hunting party that was in the back of the squad car. A couple months back, a buddy at a neighboring paid department told me 2 of the guys in the party had ended their lives shortly after, and the 3rd guy has been in and out of drug treatment centers since that day. I haven't verified any of that though, so it could just be rumors. As far as I know, the missing hunter still is missing. Story 35. My mom's a nurse. She took the call from the ambulance reporting in that they were bringing in a patient. They had a lady who regularly called an ambulance because she couldn't do fill in the blank. Laundry, roof repair, etc. One day she called because she stubbed her toe. It hurt really bad and she was sure she had broken it. She lived half a block from the hospital and had a car but couldn't drive it because her toe hurt so badly. Surprise, surprise, it was just a stubbed toe. OP, Look, I get if you want to contribute. First of all, nurse, not a 911 dispatcher. I can let that slide if it has something to do with the rest of the prompt. Not a serious emergency. This is just a false alarm. Not exactly what the question asked for. Story 36. I've posted this before, but I don't recall where. We had this medical call where a guy's wife called and was saying something was wrong with him. She claimed he had worms coming out of him. We sent an ambulance and a deputy due to the suspicious call. Deputy arrives on scene and reports to us that the caller was 100% right. The guy had worms coming out of him. Turns out that the guy had some type of bacteria or fungus you get from messing around with animal feces, and the medics said they had never seen a case as bad as his. Story 37. 4 years into my life as a dispatcher, and I've personally taken or been party to someone taking their own lives with a gunshot while still on 911. I didn't take the call, but I played it back to make sure we heard what we thought we had. A woman who managed to dial us, but all we could hear was her agonal breathing, which was very, very spooky in retrospect. A multiple vehicle DUI crash where people were pinned and screaming. I'm not talking about fear screaming, I'm talking about agonized screaming. Compound fractures, head injuries, etc. Every time someone got on the radio, you had to strain to hear them over screams that were nothing like I've ever heard. People finding people who've taken their own lives is bad. Anything with children is bad. An amputation by lawnmower comes to mind. CPR is always a struggle because people are scared, and sometimes, like I mentioned, you can hear the person's last breaths. Gunshots are unmistakable. Sometimes it takes a while to get to sleep after a shift. Story 38. Not a 911 operator, but I once called 911 when my friend and I had been out walking our dogs and noticed a car drive by several times. We both got a super weird feeling about the car, and we knew most of the cars in our neighborhood. And it wasn't any of those, so we called 911 about a suspicious vehicle driving around the complex. I should add we've just had a huge rash of robberies in the complex, further adding to our suspicions. So after we called, I turned on my radio to hear the dispatcher openly mock us for calling 911. About 15 minutes later, we hear popping noises, and we hear someone peel out of the drive a block over. So we then hear police on the radio responding to calls about gunshots in the building behind us. Turns out the car we had reported was a man looking for his ex-girlfriend, and he shot her and her new boyfriend. They both lived, if I recall correctly, and we got to talk to several cops about what we had seen and all that. I definitely felt stupid calling 911 about a suspicious vehicle, but hey, I'm trusting my instincts from now on. Story 40. I was an operator in training for about 6 months, and the strangest I ever got was a guy who called in and said he'd just been carjacked by this hotel and hung up. Called back the number a few times and couldn't get any more details. While I was trying to call back, our info channel dispatcher called the cell phone provider and got subscriber information. She recognized the name from a traffic stop that was a block from where the carjacking had supposedly occurred, and she had just ran. Confirmed the info in the 2 calls and realized the guy in the traffic stop had called in the carjacking, thinking the officers would ditch the traffic stop because the carjacking would be a higher priority. We never did find the phone that he was calling from. There was also another time where an operator had gotten a call from an OnStar thinking they were tracking a stolen car from a nearby city, and GPS was showing it now in our jurisdiction. They wanted to get our officers to the vehicle, and once they were there, they would disable the engine in the vehicle. So we pulled up our traffic cameras on this wall monitor we had and were able to locate the vehicle and direct the officers where the vehicle was going via the cameras. Once in the vicinity, OnStar disabled the vehicle, and the driver bailed into an under-construction housing subdivision, and one of the dispatchers was able to tell our officers exactly which house the guy went into because we could see it on the camera, and he was caught. That first story, I didn't really understand where it was going at first, but that guy's kind of smart. Like, I don't think it worked from the sounds of it, but he had a plan. Probably not worth trying to get out of a traffic stop by calling 911 with false information, though, because I'm pretty sure that's another charge they can tack on if they want to. But if they got away with it, it would have been kind of clever. Story 41. Fiancé is a paramedic. I'm a patient care tech. While doing a catheter on a lady, she once told us that it doesn't go in the urethra, but in the hole the dong goes in. LMAO. Fiancé transported a psych patient to a facility, so they're chilling in the back of the ambulance and she's talking to her purse. After about 5 minutes of this, she unzips her purse and a freaking opossum jumps out. My fiancé loses it, has no idea what to say or do. Then the patient proceeded to tell him, "If it wasn't for this little fella, I would have taken my own life a long time ago." Also last week he got a call to a pretty bad part of town that ended up being a domestic violence. Husband beat the crap out of his wife because she wouldn't do drugs with him. She ended up having a pretty serious subdural hematoma. Story 42. Not a 911 operator, but I was a debt collector briefly in college and called by a woman to try to set up a payment plan for her 5-figure debt. It was around 8 at night her time. She started bawling, saying she didn't have enough money for gas or to take her daughter to preschool that day and she would be better off dead. Which was disturbing, but not as much as when she started mumbling, "Oh, poor sweet baby," and I heard a kid screaming and a loud car engine, but no answer from her. Had my manager call her local 911, who told me not to disconnect. She had strapped her daughter into a car seat and was trying to end her own life in the garage with car fumes. I don't even know if this would qualify as strange. Like, horrendously tragic, but when it comes to absolutely life-consuming debt, unfortunately not all that uncommon. I'll be honest, I have pretty strong opinions of how I think the ways people get into debt are all really predatory. Well, not all, but the vast majority are all grossly predatory and just sink people further and further into the hole, and they bleed them dry and they have no recourse. And sure, you could blame financial literacy or whatever, but I think it's also very possible these people never had the means to learn about this stuff. They would never know that it was important because no one taught them when they were growing up, so how are they supposed to know? Debt is an absolutely horrible thing. From the sounds of it, this attempt on her own life and her daughter's life wasn't successful, which is a positive, in my opinion, but I do hope they found a way to deal with their debt. Story 43. God, I have so many. In the UK, so this was 999, not 911. Hope that's allowed. I once spoke to a man that called up to say that he'd slipped while getting out of the bath, and as he fell, the toilet brush somehow went up his butt and was now stuck and he couldn't move. Turned out that during the fall, the toilet brush somehow got a rubber put onto it. Ugh, dirty old man. There was once a time when a man phoned up and said his son was having a heart attack in the street. The ambulance was called and I was giving instructions over the phone what to do. When the crew arrived, the call didn't actually disconnect. I heard the ambulance crew ask where the son was, and the man said, "Right there, can't you see?" I just heard the ambulance crew say, "Sir, that's a jacket on the floor, not a person." Then the line cut out. Story 44. I'm not a 911 operator, but I work in the emergency department at a level 1 trauma center. I have some interesting ones. 1. We had a helicopter land. MVC, motor vehicle crash involving a toddler, a bear, and some serious burns. Apparently this family has the worst luck. They were going highway speeds, just a dad with a toddler in the back. The car in front of them hit a bear on the highway. The dad pulled over to help the other driver, leaving the kid in their car seat in the back seat. Then another car came and hit the dad's car. The kid's car seat was pushed into the front passenger seat. Then the dad's car caught fire with the kid in it. Dad pulled the kid out, burning both of his arms pretty badly. The kid had third-degree burns covering a good portion of his body. 2. Another MVC. Patient was driving home from family event and swerved off the road and right into a tree. One leg severed at the scene, the other barely hanging on. Paramedics brought the patient in, carrying the amputated leg in a bag behind the patient. The patient would then lose the other leg in surgery. 3. Psych patient trauma. Patient apparently didn't want to be a male anymore, so they took a razor blade to, well, you can imagine. 4. 4th of July fireworks injury via a deer. Senior citizen patient was celebrating the 4th with family outside. Apparently their property is near the woods because when they started shooting fireworks, a deer came out of the woods, scared as hell, and kicked grandma in the head while trying to jump over her. 5. I was walking from one part of the ED to the other when I heard a trauma called out on Vocera. I then see the triage medic sprinting down the hallway with a baby in his arms, followed by who I guessed was mom and dad. The triage medic was calling for people to clear the way as he was running to the trauma area. I start calling out too. Along the way, blocking the trauma pod is an old woman with a walker and a slightly less old woman directing her. I yell at them to move and they stand there like a deer in the headlights. I physically had to drag the walker and the old lady holding onto it out of the way before the medic ran them over. Baby's aunt was pulling out of the driveway and had nearly run over the baby. Baby had a nice dent in their skull but was screaming loudly, which, hey, is a good thing. And 6. First call meeting helicopter. Attempt on his own life via shotgun. Half the face was blown off, still alive, and living to this day, I believe. Okay, so OP's not a 911 operator. I gotta say, these are still some of the most direct answers to the prompt we've gotten so far. A lot of people are missing the point, but that first one, incredibly strange and very serious. I would feel like some higher powers were out to get me, or my son, if I was that dad. Like, just what are the odds? Story 45. The Chocolate Beaver. 911, what is the location of your emergency? Please help me. I get address, name, phone number. Tell me exactly what happened. Please believe me. Why isn't anyone believing me? Do you need police, fire, or EMS? There's chocolate coming out of me. What? I'm sorry, what do you mean?
I don't know. I just woke up and there's chocolate coming out from down there. My grandma and mother won't believe me.
I can hear people in the background having casual conversation. So, how do you know it's chocolate?
I smelled it.
Gag. Ugh. Anyway, if you're not familiar, most 911 agencies in the US have EMS protocols we choose from. For example, breathing difficulty, back pain, chest pain, traumatic injury, there are 34 to choose from. And at this point, I'm at a loss on deciding which protocol to use. I'm debating between the standard sick call, which is what we choose when nothing else works, or a hemorrhage card, which is what I end up picking. I'm thinking it's just a bad period and not chocolate. I end up giving her all the medical information and send EMS. Never heard from her again. But I do send the EMS unit that went a message asking about it. So, was it chocolate? Oh no, we didn't taste it. Story 46. I answer 911 and dispatch police and fire in a small town, about 14,000 people. It's a very well-off community and most of our calls are medicals and false telephone alarms. Anyway, most of the calls that fall into strange typically end up being something not that serious, as they always end up being misunderstandings. I once took a call from a very frightened 20-ish-year-old female around 11 p.m. who said there was a group of 4 people attempting to break into the house. They were at the garage trying to enter the garage door code. Officers arrive on scene and begin talking with a group of 4 girls who state they're there to visit their friend. I relate that it's just her friends coming to visit, to which she replies, "That's not possible. I don't have any friends." Well, not with that frickin' attitude. It turns out it's a common driveway shared with one other house and they went to the wrong one. As for the most serious, well, pretty much any unexpected death. I'm apparently a black cloud, so I've taken a lot of them. 3 over the course of 3 consecutive days one time. That was a lovely week. But putting those aside, the one call that scared the crap out of me was the time I answered 911 to just screaming. Non-stop, bloody murder screaming. Talk about 0 to 100 real fast. The caller was barely able to get a word out in between screams, but we eventually made out that she fell off a ladder and had a compound fracture of the ankle. She literally screamed, "Ladder, fell, bones sticking out." We do not EMD, emergency medical dispatch, but every time I attempted to transfer her over, she would hang up. She would then immediately call again and demand to know where EMS was because it had been 10 minutes, more like 10 seconds, and she proceeded to hang up while transferring and calling back 6 times. Another strange one I just thought of. Older male calls because he thinks someone is breaking into his house. When he went to look, he saw a naked female in his garage and ran back into the house and locked the door. He sees her run out of the garage and across the street. Officers arrive. One goes to find the girl and the other checks in with the family. Turns out, they have a teenage son. Shocker! Oh, and I can't believe I forgot this one. Best for last. I wasn't working it though, but the hands down strangest call I've ever heard. Came into work at 11. Newest dispatcher says she had her first fatal MVA, probably the most serious call she's had to date. Car 1 traveling southbound hits a deer. The deer rolls off the windshield and into the northbound lane where it goes through the windshield and impales the driver in the chest with its antlers, causing the car to roll several times and take down an entire telephone pole. Frickin' 1 in a million. What a way to die. Strangest stuff I've ever heard. Story 47. A friend of mine, 911 dispatcher, once told me how he received an emergency call from a guy who had fallen down a manhole during winter time. Evidently, he didn't pay attention as to where he was walking and drunkenly strolled in his own world and fell into the manhole on his way home from the club by himself. Fortunately, he did manage to get a hold of his phone after falling about 2.5 meters from street level. If not, he could have been in serious trouble. Not like there were a lot of people around at the time. Said the guy had to be lifted out of the manhole by the fire department and had to sew some stitches from a cut he got from the fall. Story 48. Here's some of the 999 calls the UK Emergency Services gets. A man calls 999 to tell them his Chinese takeaway delivery is 45 minutes late and demands prosecution for the restaurant. A woman called 999 when she woke up in a panic because her duvet was over her head. Another woman rang 999 because there had been a power cut in the area, and she was worried about a gâteau in the freezer. A woman called to report a clown in London selling balloons for £5 each, which was much more than the other clowns were charging. One caller rang 999 at 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning and asked where the best place was to get a bacon sandwich at the time. And, my personal favorite, in the UK we have a separate number for non-emergency medical calls. So a man rings 999 as he was advised to ring 111, but didn't know the number. Story 49. Obligatory, not an operator, but I was the caller. Me and some friends had went to the mall last year to do some Christmas shopping. We were in the mall probably 3 or 4 hours. Finally leaving, we head for my car. Now, I know I parked outside of Belk's, but there are 3 Belk's in this mall. Usually, I have a fantastic memory, so we start checking all the lots by all 3 Belk's. We literally searched for maybe an hour before I begin to panic. I call 911. They send out an officer who starts taking a report for my stolen car. I call my dealership who sends someone out with a different car to take me home. All of this takes maybe another hour, and by this time I'm upset, hangry, and exhausted. So the mall security guard who's been with us the entire time asks me if I would like to look one more time through the entire parking lot with the police officer. Fine, whatever, we'll check again. We were standing there taking reports and making phone calls for my stolen car. That was literally one parking space down. Story 50. Weekly occurrence. Male complainant calls in about several camouflaged subjects in his yard. Unknown description as they're wearing dark clothing and it's 4 a.m., so there's not much light aside from a streetlight several houses west of the address. Male describes them as tall, slender, most likely males, and they're standing behind the bush in his front yard. 3 subjects, maybe 4. Male puts the phone down momentarily. Faint sounds of vomiting can be heard. When asked to describe what the males are doing, caller states they're now on the neighbor's roof, aiming something at him. 3 officers are en route. Male states the subjects are firing microwaves at him, and it's making him increasingly nauseated, and he pleads for the officers to hurry up. Caller refuses medical treatment. Rescue is not dispatched. Caller once again puts his phone down to vomit, and then states he has the subjects on video. After officers arrive on scene, the caller disconnects. Officer status is checked after 10 minutes. 1096. A 1096 is a mental case. I know it's a mental case, but this one does sound pretty serious. I definitely don't have enough psych knowledge to say what it is, but yeah, strange and serious. Well done, OP. Wouldn't it be crazy if there were 3 guys just shooting microwaves at him, though? No one would believe him. Story 51. Late evening call. Woman had a medical procedure done on her foot, and she wanted me to send an officer out to help her change her dressing. I offered to send a medical crew out and see if they could help, but she didn't want to waste their time. We went back and forth about this. No way would I send a police officer out for this, and told her so repeatedly. The last time, I repeated myself that I was not going to send police out to help her with her medical issue, but I would gladly send an ambulance to have her foot attended to by a professional. She got all bent out of shape and screamed at me,
An ambulance for someone who's walking around? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
and slammed the phone down on me. I've also learned in the 10 plus years of dispatching to never say, I don't think it can get any weirder than this, because something weirder always happens. And that's all the stories we have for today. Technically, there's one more, and I'll be honest, I read the first 4 sentences of it before I realized it was just a joke about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So this is where it ends. I do try to filter out the posts that are just referential jokes. Because, sure, they'll probably be funny for the 5 or 10% of people who get them, but for the rest of people, they're just confused and it doesn't really work, you know? Anyway, that aside, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.